So Brenay has been found liable. She now owes Akira $1.5 million for stealing another woman's husband. The verdict is in, and after days of testimony, tears, and chaos, the jury didn't hesitate. Akira just won one of the wildest courtroom battles the internet's ever followed. $250,000 for alienation of affection, plus over $1 million for emotional and financial damage. For months, Brenay bragged online about taking Akira's man, mocking her as jealous and bitter. But today, that arrogance came with a price tag. Akira stood in court, surrounded by supporters, breaking down when the verdict was read. After being humiliated online, she finally walked away with justice and the proof that she wasn't crazy. She was right. Social media is calling it karma in real time. Brenay went from the other woman to the woman who owes $1.5 million. And now, fans are asking the same thing. What happens to Tim? With no money and no clout left, insiders say he's next in line for legal trouble. For Akira, this isn't just a win, it's a message. You can't destroy someone's marriage, gloat about it, and think you'll walk away untouched. She lost her husband, but Brenay just lost everything else.
If you fight, you fail. If you fight, you fail, ladies and gentlemen. As depicted in that TikTok, there has been a case that's been going pretty viral of two women who went to court. The woman who obviously ended up winning the lawsuit or, reached a settlement was Akira. A backstory on Akira is she was married to a young man, and he ended up leaving her to be with another woman. And the other woman started to taunt her and started to antagonize her via her TikTok presence and kind of like flaunting and gloating with the partner on social media. And you can only imagine how difficult this was for Akira behind the scenes, knowing what happened, knowing that she wasn't the person in the wrong. And to add insult to injury, your ex-partner is flaunting in your face with the woman that they cheated on you with on social media. And they're receiving all of these likes and all of this attention. You can only imagine the amount of pressure that Akira was under. So what Akira ended up doing was she sought out legal representation and she took the girlfriend to court. And I appreciate this story, especially as a believer. And I'm gonna tell you why. I made an analysis dissecting the film Kill Bill, one of my favorite films of all time. And what I loved about the messaging of that film is vindication and justice is a real thing in this lifetime. Not just when we face final judgment, but you will also have opportunity to experience justice in your lifetime. And I think a lot of, especially believers, I'm speaking to believers right now, I think a lot of believers, they misinterpret the idea of not seeking out vengeance and waiting on the Lord as if you're never going to receive any justice or vindication for what you went through. That's not the God that we serve. The God that we serve is actually a God of justice and order. The only difference is God doesn't want you to repay evil for evil. However, it is absolutely suitable for you to seek out legal representation and legal support as need be. And this is perfect. This is the perfect layout of how to do so, even in a case of infidelity, even in a case of specifically dealing with erotic and romantic envy. So for those of you all who have the publication Green Eyes, you all are very familiar with this excerpt. And better yet, you all know that the way that this woman sought out legal counsel is actually spot on with the excerpt in the book. And I'm going to read from it a little bit later, but to summarize right now, just so we can get into the nitty gritty of the topic, that excerpt breaks down when you are dealing with a scorned ex-partner or the new partner of an ex-partner who is trying to initiate a one-sided competition with you, and they're orchestrating envious attacks against you, such as what Brenay was doing, and better yet, doing it on a social media platform, right? So she was kind of utilizing other people to big herself up and to big the relationship up, even though she knew she was in the wrong. When you're dealing with those kinds of attacks and someone antagonizing you on that level, sometimes you will have to seek out legal support because you don't know how far that person will go. I've stated this time and time again when we talk about envy on this channel. When you are dealing with a person who is operating from the emotional state of envy, a lot of the time they have convinced themselves that in order to alleviate their feelings of envy, they have to pose a constant attack and threat to their target of envy. That's why they're very relentless in nature. That's why it's not enough for the person to take your partner, but they have to flaunt it on social media every other day and do little things to get under your skin. Right? So I feel like Brenay was a classic case of envy. I really do. I feel like she depicted a lot of the characteristics to the T. And it's very unfortunate because both of these women are beautiful and Brenay threw her life away. You know, as I stated before, if you fight, you fail. But another thing that I want to note is in that excerpt, it talks about how sometimes you have to seek out that legal support so you can put protective measures in place because you never know how far an envious person will go. Who's to say that this woman didn't get to the point to where she was stalking Akira or trying to inflict some kind of emotional and or physical harm onto Akira out of envy and jealousy? So, nevertheless, I want to read directly from that excerpt just to provide some context for those who already are familiar with the book but need a refresher. And the excerpt reads, Erotic and romantic envy. Erotic envy is often prevalent in romantic situations, especially when one is presented with a love triangle. One may be in a predicament where they are dealing with a scorned lover, an envious partner of an ex, or a competitive romantic opponent. Under these circumstances, erotic envy should not be taken lightly, as it often results in legal consequences or DEATH. So after reading that excerpt, what I want to highlight is the legal consequences piece. There was another analysis I did also talking about erotic and romantic envy. I've, referenced that particular excerpt in the book with different cases and stories several times on my channel already. So if you haven't watched that analysis, feel free to. I believe the woman's name was Kayla. And this was a case where the woman was actually stalked. And the young woman who I guess the partner ended up leaving her for and started to date this other woman in a completely different state. The other woman was so scorned that she flew out to the different state, went to the new woman's place of, resident, went to her home and unalived her. And she was recently found guilty. And I'm glad that, this conversation is being had in courtrooms, because it's putting it into context that envy is not something to take lightly. I will say this time and time again. I will continue to scream this from the mountaintops. When we talk about envy, we're not talking about it from a surface level. We're not using it as a badge of honor and making little cute statements like my haters are my motivators. No, when we talk about and dissect envy on this channel, we're talking about the brutal consequences of it. More so the brutal consequences of taking envy lightly. And one of the first things that I encourage people to do, and the publication Green Eyes breaks this down in detail, how to differentiate normal human emotions such as like jealousy, even some instances of comparison, right? That's why there's a whole theory known as social comparison theory. Even in our developmental stages, more so like in our teenage years and things like that, we shift into being a little bit more conscientious of how we're performing and how we look in comparison to our peers. That is a natural component of human nature, especially when we view it from a developmental theory lens, right? But differentiating that natural, human emotion, whether it be moments of comparison, moments of maybe even jealousy, differentiating that from someone reaching a full-blown state of envy is very important. We have to differentiate the two. And the publication Green Eyes actually depicts it in sequential phases. Typically, when someone is battling with fleeting feelings of comparison and jealousy, and in the first few pages, the book breaks this down. When someone is dealing with fleeting feelings of jealousy and comparison, they're typically able to subdue those emotions and subdue those thoughts by acknowledging other areas of their life that they're grateful for. They typically have protective factors in place to take their attention off of whatever it is that they may be coveting at a given point in time. So they may acknowledge the fact, okay, I didn't get that promotion, but I'm really happy in my relationship and I have a great relationship with my family. So I may not have gotten that promotion, but I have other areas of my life that I'm grateful for. Or maybe I'm doing really well in my job, but I'm married and I'm having a difficult time conceiving, but you know what? I have all of these other blessings going for me. It just may not be my time yet. So a healthy person is able to feel those emotions, but they're able to combat it with other areas of their life that they are grateful for. So it's just a matter of being emotionally balanced. However, once a person reaches a state of envy, they have convinced themselves that they have to attack the target in order to feel better about whatever it is that they think they lack. So with that being said, I'm so glad that people are taking this into serious context. And for people who they see the red flags, but they take it lightly because either they're feeding into the trope themselves or they're allowing other people to water down how serious envy is by making statements such as, oh, well, you're thinking too much of yourself. Oh, it's not healthy to think that someone is envious of you. It's not healthy to think everyone is envious of you. You should be able to go on in your day-to-day life and have positive experiences with at least one person a day, right? If you're going outside or if you're working remote, on average, you should be having more positive or neutral experiences than you are having negative experiences, right? It's about a balance. I think an instance where someone is making the assumption that everyone is envious of them and everyone is hating on them, I think that that's different. That's where that kind of rhetoric of, okay, girl, or okay, man, you need to sit down and calm down and get off your high horse. I think that argument is more so fitting with someone who assumes everyone is hating on them and everyone is envious of them. However, someone who is acknowledging isolated incidents, that shoe doesn't necessarily fit. And it's dangerous to encourage someone to knock their defenses down when they peep some of those red flags, because if they end up in harm's way, people will wish that they took those envious signs more seriously. And what I appreciate about this case with Akira and Brenay is I believe that this is one of the first cases where it was a proactive measure and we actually saw vindication. We saw justice. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the time we see that justice and vindication when someone is already gone or someone has already been put in harm's way. I have another video where I dissected a case of a love triangle, and I think I titled it something along the lines of like battle scars, where a woman, her face is disfigured permanently for life because her and another woman were messing with the same man, and the other woman said out of defense she threw like something, like some substance in her face, and it disfigured the woman's face for the rest of her life, and I believe she's blind. So even if it's not to a case where the person is no longer here, it can leave some kind of battle scar when we don't utilize protective and proactive measures. I want us to get to the state to where we are being more proactive when we peep these envious red flags. And this is why I will continue to plug tangible resources so people have something to reference. Now, another thing I want to highlight is the "if you fight, you fail" piece. And this is actually based on an excerpt in the publication All Strings Attached, The Queen's Quarrel. So this publication is all about romantic dynamics. So for those of you all who are married, who are engaged, or maybe you all are in a situation such as what Akira went through, where you went through a recent separation with your ex-fiance, ex-husband, ex-partner, and you're realizing, and this is also gender inclusive, you guys, but you're realizing that their new partner is being utilized as a pawn to come up against you. Now, I want to say this, although that's a very real thing, the ex-partner, because they're the common denominator, right? This new person doesn't really have affiliations with you. So they are the common denominator. And a lot of the time, your ex-partner will be the person putting the battery in the back of their new lover to come up against you. Because realistically, the new lover doesn't have a dog in the fight. They don't have any business talking about you or doing anything against you. And the only reason why they will feel so comfortable to keep coming up against you is usually there's an incentive behind the scenes. But nevertheless, though, although that's a real aspect, I do want to shift the accountability back onto the woman. In this case, we're talking about Brenay and Akira, two women, right, who were going toe-to-toe, even though it sounded more so like a one-sided competition, right? If Akira was doing anything, it was to defend herself. But Brenay, on the other hand, she was antagonizing Akira, and she was the one in the wrong. You took that woman's man. Period. So you doing little things to get under her skin and flaunting on social media and things like that, completely out of bounds, Brenay. Nevertheless, though, I want to take the accountability or shift the accountability onto women who operate like Brenay. Yes, the man can utilize you as a pawn, but you going out of your way to compete with, to antagonize a woman who is not interested in competing with you at all, who is not interested in going back and forth with you at all, that's indicative of you having feelings of envy towards that other woman. Because once you already get the other partner, why are you not staying focused on that new relationship? And to break this down, for a lot of people who are confused, right? You guys are questioning, why won't their new partner leave me alone? Like, you have to leave me alone. Stop watching me. Stop following me. You don't need to pop up to my place of work. But the real reason why they can't leave you alone is because they are also utilizing the common denominator as a pawn. A lot of the time, the new lover is actually not interested in your partner. They're interested in competing with you and taking something from you because they're envious of you. And they feel like it's a badge of honor being able to take something from you or inflict some kind of emotional harm onto you by infiltrating into your romantic partnership and quote unquote taking your lover from you. So it has less to do with the partner. That's why they can't enjoy the relationship once they actually do come together. That's why it's not enough for them to just sail off into the sunset and be happy and go on their merry way. No, they constantly have to antagonize you, flaunt, gloat, track you down, stalk you. It's because it's not even about the partner. It's about inflicting emotional torment onto the target of envy. And a lot of the time they're utilizing the pawn because they know that the partner is the common denominator. And if they know that they can't gain access to you because you will never be their friend, you will never do business with them, they will utilize your partner. If they realize that your partner is a little bit more weak-willed and weak-minded, they will utilize your partner to gain proximity to you because they know in any other capacity you will not entertain it. You will never do business with them, you will never be friends with them, and you will never be friends with their friends, right? So with that being said, if you are in a predicament similar to Brenay, I'm not here to judge, but I'm just here to warn you. If you fight, you will fail. If you play silly games, you will win silly prizes. So as depicted in the case, you may end up having to pay consequences, like legal consequences, financial consequences. Secondly, even if you think that you're winning the affection and the approval of the romantic partner in the midst of it, 9 times out of 10, you don't realize that their perception of you has changed. And to break this down, I'm actually going to read from the excerpt, If You Fight, You Fail, in the publication All Strings Attached, The Queen's Quarrel, to break this down further. And it reads, if you fight, you fail. When one is faced with romantic triangulation, they have to not react out of pride and ego. Not only does refraining from impulsive behavior protect you from danger, this was also dissected in the previous publication, Green Eyes, it also keeps you from biting the hidden bait. Whether the romantic perpetrator is fueling triangulation by allowing romantic prospects to battle over their affection, the result remains constant. The woman who fights to win a romantic prospect also exchanges her dignity and standards. The individual being fought over often internalizes fighting efforts with inflated importance and ego. The woman who fights to remain doesn't recognize her conquest was inflaming a monster in the making. Once she has fought off other prospects, she doesn't understand her partner has developed a new perception of her. They now view her as a woman who doesn't value herself, but most importantly, a woman who will tolerate infidelity. Her competitive response resulted in her partner perceiving the opportunity to capitalize on her insecurity without facing accountability. So as depicted in that excerpt, you have to be very careful when you're getting so caught up in ego and pride and competing with the next person. A lot of the time you don't realize that the person you're fighting over is viewing you in a completely different light, because they know that you will overlook their need to take accountability for the role that they played in the triangulation and instead inflict that abuse onto an innocent person. Now, to take it up a notch and connect this back to Brenay's case, here's the thing about Brenay and what she doesn't realize. All of that taunting and flaunting that she was doing on social media, and the partner, I believe his name was Tim, he saw it beneficial. You know, it was a great opportunity to kind of gloat in his ex's face and to make it appear as if he was doing so much better. And also they were receiving a lot of narcissistic supply through social media, a bunch of people liking their post and commenting. But now the reality has set in. After going to court and with Akira winning the settlement, I believe they settled on $1.5 million that Brenay has to pay. And I'm not sure if they have that, either in liquid cash or in assets and savings. I'm not sure if Brenay or Tim has that to just give out. So my hypothesis is what was first fun and games for Tim, you know, being able to flaunt and gloat on his ex and receive benefits from Brenay because she was performing to make it seem as if she was better than Akira. Now there's going to be a bitterness and a resentment because now they have that financial and legal overhead that they more than likely cannot cover. Now, this is just my hypothesis. I could be wrong, but I would not be surprised if he hadn't already, if Tim ends up leaving Brenay, or if they stay in a relationship with one another, but he starts cheating on her and dogging her out. Because his, I guess, camaraderie, for lack of better words, with Brenay wasn't built upon him actually having a loyalty to her as much as it was she was the perfect pawn to go up against his ex. And here's another thing. This is why when I talk to women, and, you know, I not only dissected it from Akira's lens, but I also want this to be a warning for women who may be more so on Brenay's side. I'm not judging. Maybe you are in a predicament where you're more so in alignment with Brenay's stance. We're human. I'm not here to judge, but I am here to warn you. I am. Understand that if it all comes crumbling down, do not be surprised when that lover that you put everything on the line for leaves you high and dry and moves on to the next prospect, especially once the block gets too hot. In a case such as legal consequences, having to pay something because you inflicted emotional and psychological abuse or damage onto an innocent party, or someone comes to terms with the fact, okay, well, these two were married and there is a clause that, you know, acknowledges infidelity and you will have to pay up in the case of infidelity. Now, if that man ends up leaving you with the bag to carry, you can't be mad because you chose to play a game that you really didn't have to play. You had the option to bow out gracefully. So dissecting this erotic and romantic triangle, erotic and romantic envy in particular, from both Akira's stance as well as Brenay's stance, what this is all getting at is if you play silly games, you will in fact win silly prizes, okay? So that's all that I have for this analysis today. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. But of course, I want to hear you all's comments, opinions, perspectives, as well as some personal experiences that you've had in the comment section below. I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next one, babes. Take care.